Has anyone ever told you that you were the problem, just to avoid blame?
I never imagined that my own son, after all the years I'd spent raising him through scraped knees and teenage rebellions in our quiet suburban neighborhood outside Cleveland, would one day march into the home I'd maintained single-handedly since his father's passing a decade earlier, declaring with that unyielding tone he inherited from his grandfather that his wife Lisa, their energetic 7-year-old son Tommy and 5-year-old daughter Sarah, along with her overbearing 75-year-old mother Ethel, were all packing up their cramped two-bedroom apartment in the city and moving into my two-story colonial house right away because the walls there felt like they were squeezing the life out of them every single day. And he had already made the decision final without consulting me or leaving any space for discussion, so I shouldn't even bother trying to argue as he grabbed his keys from the hook by the door and headed out to drive the 2 hours back to fetch them all in his overloaded pickup truck, leaving me standing there in the sunlit kitchen with a half-empty coffee mug in my hand at 62 years old, staring at the faded floral wallpaper I'd chosen myself during one of those weekend projects to keep busy after the funeral, feeling a mix of betrayal and rising indignation because this place represented every bit of independence I'd fought for through nursing shifts and careful budgeting, turning it into a sanctuary filled with memories like the quilt on the couch sewn by my mother and the bookshelf lined with novels that helped me through lonely evenings, yet here was David acting as if my voice didn't matter anymore, treating me like some peripheral figure in his life, rather than the woman who had hosted countless Thanksgivings and slipped him cash during his early marriage struggles without a second thought. What in the heck gave him the right to assume I would just step aside and let this extended family invasion disrupt the routine I'd built so meticulously, especially knowing Ethel's reputation from past visits where she critiqued everything from my casserole recipes to the way I arranged the throw pillows, always carrying that air of superiority from her days managing a small boutique downtown before retirement, while Lisa, sweet but spineless in my opinion, trailed behind with the kids who would undoubtedly turn the living room into a whirlwind of toys and noise that echoed through the empty halls I'd grown accustomed to enjoying. In silence? As the clock ticked past noon with no sign of their return yet, that initial shock in my chest transformed into a determined spark, the kind that comes from too many times swallowing pride for the sake of harmony, prompting me to roll up my sleeves and get to work on a response that wouldn't involve yelling or ultimatums, but would instead send a clear message through actions. Starting with the living room where I began methodically rearranging the furniture in ways that would confound, rather than comfort, pushing the heavy oak sofa lengthwise against one wall to narrow the pathway to the staircase and creating a zigzag of end tables and footstools that forced anyone entering to weave through like navigating a dimly lit corn maze at the county fair. Not damaging a single piece, but positioning them strategically so that the coffee table jutted out just enough to catch an unwary foot, and the armchair I'd angled toward the corner blocked the direct line to the hallway leading upstairs, all while chuckling softly to myself at the mental image of their puzzled expressions, because if they were so eager to claim space without asking, they could at least earn it by dealing with a little disorientation first. A subtle form of revenge that felt empowering in its cleverness without crossing into outright hostility, though a twinge of guilt flickered as I paused to dust a framed photo of David at his high school graduation, wondering if this pettiness made me the unreasonable one or if it was simply standing up for the boundaries that family sometimes forgot existed. By mid-afternoon, with sweat beading on my forehead from the physical effort despite the cool October breeze slipping through the cracked window, I stepped back to survey my handiwork. The room now resembling a puzzle designed to test patience rather than a welcoming space for unloading suitcases and settling in. And I even added a few touches like stacking some old magazines into precarious towers on the side tables that might topple with the slightest bump, ensuring the chaos would build naturally as they tried to impose their order on mine, all the while my mind racing ahead to how this might play out over dinner or the inevitable questions about sleeping arrangements in a house with only 3 bedrooms upstairs, one of which I'd converted into a sewing room that held my late husband's old tools and papers I wasn't ready to share. Hours stretched on as I busied myself in the kitchen, preparing a simple lunch of soup and sandwiches just for myself, the aroma of chicken broth filling the air and reminding me of simpler times when David would come home from college breaks craving home-cooked meals. But now those memories clashed with the reality of his presumptuous phone call earlier, checking if the guest room linens were fresh, as if the matter was already settled, fueling my resolve to make their arrival anything but seamless. Finally, around dusk, when the sky turned that familiar Ohio shade of deep blue streaked with orange from the setting sun, I heard the familiar rumble of David's truck engine approaching up the gravel driveway I'd resurfaced last spring with help from a neighbor. The tires crunching to a halt, followed by the slam of doors and the excited chatter of children's voices mingling with Lisa's tired instructions to be careful with the boxes and Ethel's grumbled complaints about the bumpy road from the city, their footsteps growing louder as they ascended the front porch steps, carrying duffel bags and a cooler that probably held perishables from their rushed packing. The door handle turned with a click, swinging open to reveal their figures silhouetted against the porch light, David in the lead with a box under one arm and a forced smile that suggested he anticipated gratitude. Lisa balancing Sarah on her hip while Tommy tugged at her other hand, and Ethel bringing up the rear with her rolling suitcase wheezing along behind. All of them stepping across the threshold into the foyer where the late afternoon shadows played tricks on the rearranged layout. Their conversations halting abruptly as eyes widened and faces paled under the warm glow of the overhead fixture at the sight of the labyrinthine living room stretching out before them like an unexpected obstacle course. The sofa's new position blocking the usual flow and the clustered tables creating barriers that turned what should have been a straightforward entry into a hesitant navigation, with Tommy immediately bumping into an end table and sending a vase wobbling precariously, while Ethel let out a sharp intake of breath, muttering something about the place looking like a tornado had whipped through. Lisa's mouth opening in surprise as she shifted Sarah higher, and David freezing mid-step with the box nearly slipping from his grasp, their collective shock hanging in the air thick enough to touch as they took in not just the furniture shuffle, but the partially packed boxes in the corners that I'd left as hints of my own preparations to reclaim space if needed, and then their gazes drifted further to the slightly ajar door of the study at the end of the hall. A room I'd always kept private, containing shelves of old letters and documents from my husband's business days that now seemed to beckon with untold secrets, leaving them all rooted in place with expressions that mixed confusion, annoyance, and a dawning realization that this homecoming wasn't going to be as straightforward as David had promised. That stunned silence in the foyer after their eyes took in the rearranged living room, and the teasing glimpse of the study door lingered just long enough for me to savor the momentary upper hand before David cleared his throat and started barking orders to push the sofa back into place while Lisa set Sarah down gently and began corralling Tommy away from the wobbling vase, Ethel crossing her arms with a huff that echoed her perpetual dissatisfaction as she wheeled her suitcase toward the corner, where I'd strategically placed a cluster of chairs to block easy access to the coat closet, all of them moving tentatively through the makeshift maze like explorers in unfamiliar territory, which only heightened the absurdity of their uninvited arrival in what had been my orderly domain for years, prompting me to step forward with a feigned smile and offer to help unload the truck so we could all get settled before the evening chill set in fully over our suburban street lined with maple trees, shedding their autumn leaves in golden drifts. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the lawn I'd mowed meticulously every Saturday, we hauled boxes and bags inside in a procession that felt more like an invasion than a family reunion, David grunting under the weight of a plastic bin filled with kitchen gadgets, while Lisa managed the cooler with one arm and guided the kids with the other. Tommy chattering excitedly about claiming the biggest room upstairs and Sarah clutching her stuffed bear as if it were her only anchor in this sudden upheaval, Ethel trailing behind with complaints about the lack of a proper guest suite and how her back already ached from the drive, compounded by this ridiculous furniture fiasco that she assumed was my way of protesting their presence. Though I kept my retorts locked behind a nod and a vague comment about spring cleaning gone awry to maintain the pretense of hospitality, while inwardly chuckling at how the disarray was already sowing seeds of doubt about the smoothness of their takeover. Once everything was piled in the hallway amid the zigzagging tables, they dispersed to claim spaces upstairs where the guest rooms awaited with fresh linens I'd begrudgingly changed that morning despite my reservations. Lisa and the kids taking the larger one with its queen bed and view of the backyard garden I'd tended through hot summers and mild winters. David opting for the smaller twin setup next door that used to be his childhood space, still adorned with faded posters of baseball heroes from his youth, and Ethel commandeering the sewing room without a second thought by shoving my fabric bolts aside to make room for her vanity mirror and array of pill bottles. Her voice carrying down the stairs with directives about needing hot water for her tea and a fan because the air felt stuffy up here in ways it never had during her sporadic past visits. Down in the kitchen as twilight settled and the house filled with the unfamiliar sounds of footsteps overhead and drawers opening in exploration, I busied myself preparing what I hoped would pass for a welcoming dinner of pot roast simmering slowly in the crock pot with carrots and potatoes from the local market. The savory aroma beginning to waft through the air and mingle with the faint scent of their city-brought belongings like fast food wrappers and laundry detergent that clashed with my home's familiar notes of lemon polish and fresh-baked bread, my mind already plotting the next layer of subtle resistance, because if they thought they could waltz in and reshape my life without consequence, a meal tailored to highlight their vulnerabilities might just remind them of the host's quiet power in this domestic arena. Drawing from snippets I'd overheard during family calls about Ethel's sensitive digestion after her gallbladder removal a few years back and David's ongoing battle with high blood pressure that he downplayed during holidays, I amped up the seasoning with generous heaps of garlic and onion for that punchy flavor Ohio grandmas swear by for warding off colds, then stirred in extra salt knowing it would make their throats tighten without me uttering a word of warning. Serving it all up on the dining table cleared just enough amid the living room clutter, with a side of cornbread and a pitcher of iced tea sweetened the way Lisa liked from past gatherings, inviting them down with a call that echoed up the stairs and brought them shuffling in one by one, faces still tinged with the earlier pallor, but masking it behind forced cheer as they took seats around the oak table my husband and I had refinished together during one of our rare date nights at home. Conversation started haltingly over the clink of forks and knives, David praising the house's coziness now that they were here to liven it up while Lisa shared anecdotes about the kids' school projects to fill the awkward pauses, Tommy and Sarah poking at their portions with wide-eyed curiosity, and Ethel launching into a monologue about the inadequacies of their old apartment's plumbing compared to the setup, but soon the effects kicked in as plates emptied unevenly. Ethel dabbing at her forehead and pushing her helping away midway with a hand pressed to her midsection claiming the richness was settling like a stone despite her usual iron stomach for such dishes. David reaching repeatedly for his glass and loosening his collar with a nervous laugh about needing to watch his intake. These days, Lisa trying to mediate by suggesting lighter fare next time while the children wrinkled their noses and declared it too spicy for their tender palates. The whole scene unfolding into a comedic tableau of discomfort that had me suppressing a grin behind sips of my own milder bowl, because nothing underscores a point quite like a home-cooked meal that bites back just enough to make guests reconsider their appetites for intrusion. That petty satisfaction washed over me as they retired early. With murmurs of gratitude mixed with groans about indigestion, the house quieting into an uneasy peace that allowed me to clear the table alone under the soft glow of the pendant light. But as I wiped down the counters and rinsed the dishes in the sink with water running hot to match my lingering resentment, my eyes caught on an overlooked envelope peeking from under a stack of mail on the sideboard where David must have tossed it absent-mindedly upon arrival, the return address from a debt collection agency in bold print screaming urgency with past due notices for amounts that hinted at gambling woes far beyond what his job troubles could explain. A damning clue that twisted my gut with concern for him yet fueled my determination to unearth more before this family charade unraveled further, and just as I was slipping it into my apron pocket for safekeeping, footsteps padded softly from the hallway revealing Lisa standing there pale-faced once more with another find clutched in her hand, a yellowed letter from the sewing room drawer that she'd uncovered while unpacking Ethel's things, its faded script promising revelations about old family ties that could upend everything they thought they knew about our shared history in this house. Lisa's unexpected appearance in the kitchen that night with the yellowed letter trembling slightly in her grasp pulled me into a hushed conversation under the dim light of the single bulb above the sink. Her eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and unease as she explained how she'd been sorting through the sewing room drawer earlier while Ethel napped and the kids played quietly upstairs, only to stumble upon this fragile envelope tucked behind a stack of my old patterns, its postmark faded, but clearly from the early 1980s addressed to my late husband in handwriting that I recognized instantly as belonging to Ethel's late sister who had passed young under mysterious circumstances. The contents spilling out revelations about family favors and hidden connections that linked our histories in ways I'd long suspected but never confronted directly, making the air between us thick with the weight of unspoken questions about why such a thing had been preserved in a room now overtaken by Ethel's belongings and how it tied into the current chaos of their sudden relocation into my home, where every corner now felt like a repository of buried tensions waiting to erupt. We sat at the scarred wooden table where I'd shared countless meals with David during his visits, the letter spread open between us, as Lisa whispered details about her own growing doubts regarding the apartment situation, admitting that David's explanations about job losses didn't fully account for the mounting bills she'd glimpsed on statements hidden in his briefcase. And in that vulnerable moment, she confided her fears that Ethel's insistence on joining them stemmed from more than just maternal protectiveness, perhaps a way to keep tabs on the finances after her own widowhood left her reliant on sporadic checks from distant relatives, prompting me to share a fraction of my resentment over the unannounced takeover while carefully avoiding outright accusations that might fracture the fragile peace we'd manufactured since their arrival. Though inwardly I wrestled with the moral dilemma of exploiting this discovery to probe deeper into secrets that could either unite us against common foes or drive irreparable wedges through the family fabric I'd tried so hard to mend over the years. Morning broke with the usual clamor of children bounding down the stairs and pots clanging in the kitchen as Lisa attempted to prepare breakfast amid the lingering disarray from the previous day's unpacking. Tommy and Sarah transforming the living room into a makeshift obstacle course that knocked over one of my precarious magazine towers, with gleeful shrieks echoing off the walls I'd painted a soft cream color to soothe my evenings alone. Ethel emerging late from the sewing room with her hair pinned up and a demand for fresh coffee strong enough to cut through the fog of her alleged indigestion from dinner, her sharp gaze sweeping the space as if assessing territory to conquer while David lingered over his phone at the table scrolling through what he claimed were job listings, but struck me as evasive glances toward notifications that buzzed intermittently like warnings from creditors. Throughout the day, as I moved through household tasks like laundering the linens they'd soiled and weeding the garden beds out back where the late summer flowers still bloomed defiantly, the weight of that letter gnawed at me, fueling a plan for revenge that balanced on the edge of cruelty and cleverness by deciding to weave it into our afternoon coffee ritual around the table where conversations naturally flowed amid the scent of percolating brew and slices of apple pie from the local bakery. Casually retrieving the album from the shelf in the den that held those old picnic photos I'd mentioned in passing before, flipping to pages showing a younger Ethel laughing with my husband at community events during the time when her family faced hardships after her sister's illness drained their savings, commenting innocently on how striking the resemblances were and how it must have been comforting for her to have such reliable friends back then when life threw curveballs like unexpected medical bills and lost opportunities. The effect rippled outward as David paused mid-bite with his fork hovering, his brow furrowing in confusion while Lisa leaned in closer to examine the images with a soft gasp of recognition tying them to stories Ethel had shared about lean years. The kids oblivious as they colored nearby, but Tommy piping up with a question about why great-grandma looked so happy in the pictures, and Ethel herself freezing with her cup halfway to her lips, her face draining of color once more as she snatched the album with a forced chuckle, dismissing it all as harmless nostalgia from a time when neighbors pitched in without the strings attached that people imagine today, though the tremor in her voice and the way her eyes darted to David betrayed a deeper unease that planted seeds of suspicion about the true motives behind her relocation and the debts that might be chasing them all into my sanctuary. That witty insertion of the past into the present felt like a satisfying counterpunch to their presumptions. Humorous in the way Ethel's bluster crumbled into evasive anecdotes that only heightened the room's tension without me needing to raise my voice or point fingers directly, leaving everyone shifting uncomfortably in their seats as the conversation veered to safer topics like the kids' upcoming school enrollment in the local district and Lisa's hopes for part-time work at the nearby library. Yet as the afternoon waned into evening with the sun casting elongated shadows through the bay window overlooking the quiet street where neighbors waved from their porches, I couldn't shake the guilt creeping in over using family heirlooms as weapons, especially when Sarah toddled over to climb into my lap seeking a story about the old days, her innocent trust, making me question if my choices to stir these pots were eroding the grandmotherly role I'd cherished or if they were essential to reclaiming the autonomy that had sustained me through widowhood's isolation. Dusk settled with the family scattering to their routines, David stepping out to the garage for what he called a quick call to a potential employer while Ethel retreated upstairs muttering about needing rest from the day's emotional toll. Lisa enlisting the kids in picking up toys that had migrated everywhere during play, and I found myself alone in the hallway reflecting on the day's undercurrents when suddenly David's phone rang from the living room where he'd left it charging on the side table, the screen lighting up with an unknown number that he answered hastily upon returning with a hurried hello that turned his expression ashen and his free hand clenching into a fist as he paced away toward the back door, the muffled urgency of his voice carrying fragments about payments and deadlines that hinted at threats far more pressing than any job hunt, leaving Lisa and me exchanging worried glances from the kitchen doorway while Ethel's footsteps halted overhead as if eavesdropping, the entire house poised on the brink of whatever bombshell that call was about to detonate next. David's frantic pacing outside the back door during that ominous phone call stretched into what felt like an eternity under the starry Ohio sky dotted with the faint glow of distant streetlights from our quiet neighborhood, his voice rising and falling in clipped arguments about extensions and collateral that seeped through the screen door like smoke from a hidden fire, leaving Lisa and me huddled in the kitchen with our ears strained while Ethel's silhouette appeared at the top of the stairs, pretending to adjust a light bulb but clearly hanging on every word, the tension coiling tighter around us all as fragments like "can't pay it all now" and "give me a week" confirmed my suspicions about gambling debts that had ballooned beyond his sporadic construction gigs and explained the desperation behind their rushed move into my home where financial stability had always been my unyielding foundation built on decades of nursing, overtime, and frugal choices after my husband's early heart attack. When he finally pocketed the phone and re-entered with a face flushed from more than just the cool night air, brushing off our concerned questions with a vague assurance that it was just a mix-up with an old client invoice, the lie hung palpably in the air, prompting Lisa to press gently about transparency for the kids' sake while Ethel descended to interject with her own tales of economic hardships from her boutique days to deflect and rally them against what she called my meddlesome oversight. But I held my tongue in that moment, choosing observation over confrontation, because revealing the full extent of my knowledge too soon might shatter the delicate balance and force choices I wasn't ready to make, like evicting my own grandson from the only stable roof over his head or enabling David's downward spiral without boundaries that protected my sanctuary. The following days blurred into a relentless rhythm of cohabitation that amplified every grievance, from the kids' mourning routines turning the bathroom into a splash zone of toothpaste globs and scattered towels that I mopped up silently while biting back frustration over the loss of my serene showers, to Ethel's escalating demands for separate vegetarian meals and a dedicated space for her afternoon naps away from Tommy's energetic crashes through the house like a pint-sized tornado, testing the limits of my patience with his boundless curiosity about every drawer and cabinet, Lisa caught in the middle attempting to mediate with apologies that rang increasingly hollow as she juggled remote work calls from the dining table amid the clutter of unpacked boxes still dominating the living room, despite my subtle rearrangements meant to discourage lingering chaos. Amid this domestic storm, my internal conflict deepened as I overheard more whispers between David and Lisa about eviction notices from their apartment complex that tied directly to unpaid rent accrued from his casino weekends in nearby Toledo, a habit He'd hidden even from her until the collectors started calling daily, making me question if my role as the overlooked matriarch should extend to bailing them out again, like the time I'd co-signed his first car loan only for it to end in repossession. Or if drawing lines now would paint me as the heartless one in a family narrative where viewers my age might nod in reluctant agreement with tough love, but still ache at the sight of Sarah's drawings taped to the fridge depicting our forever home, with stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. Seizing an opportunity during what I proposed as a low-key family game night around the coffee table cleared of its obstructive angle for the evening, complete with decks of cards and bowls of popcorn from the microwave that filled the air with buttery warmth, contrasting the underlying chill of unresolved issues. I orchestrated my next revenge by innocently incorporating printouts I'd gathered that afternoon from the library computer about local support groups for financial recovery and gambling addiction resources tailored to Ohio residents facing similar binds. Sliding the neatly folded pages under David's hand during a round of rummy with a casual remark on how fascinating the community programs were these days for folks getting back on track after unexpected setbacks. Watching as his cards slipped from his fingers and his eyes scanned the bold headlines about anonymous meetings and debt consolidation plans that mirrored his predicament so precisely it bordered on psychic insight. The ripple effect unfolded with Lisa's hand flying to her mouth in a gasp of dawning comprehension as she pieced together the phone call fragments with these materials. The kids pausing their giggling over mismatched pairs to ask what the papers meant, while Ethel attempted to swat them away with a scoff about busybodies meddling in private affairs. But David's silence spoke volumes as he folded the sheets slowly with knuckles whitening. The humor emerging in his feeble joke about it being perfect timing for a friend's cousin in need, a deflection that only amplified the awkward laughter rippling through the group and exposed the cracks in their united front without me needing to utter a single accusation. Delivering a witty satisfaction that flipped the power dynamic ever so slightly by handing him the tools for change on a silver platter, while underscoring that ignorance of his troubles wouldn't fly under my roof anymore. Yet as the game wrapped up early with excuses about bedtime routines and the house settling into its nighttime hush broken only by the occasional creak of floorboards under shifting weights, that triumph soured with a pang of regret when Lisa lingered to thank me quietly for the nudge toward help, her vulnerability reminding me of my own younger days navigating marriage strains. And Sarah's hug goodnight tugged at the grandmotherly instincts that warred with my resolve to prioritize self-preservation over endless enabling, leaving me to ponder in the quiet of my bedroom if these escalating barbs were reclaiming my life or isolating me further in a web of my own weaving. By the end of that tense week, as autumn leaves piled thicker on the lawn demanding raking I postponed amid the indoor turmoil, the atmosphere thickened with accusations bubbling just below the surface during shared meals where conversations skirted finances like minefields. Ethel's manipulative stories of her past sacrifices pulling Lisa closer to her side, while David avoided my gaze during coffee refills, until one evening after a subdued dinner of takeout pizza to avoid another kitchen mishap, they cornered me in the hallway leading to the study, David at the forefront with arms crossed and a determined set to his jaw demanding to know exactly what secrets I'd been hiding behind that locked door since the day they arrived. Their faces a blend of entitlement and underlying fear illuminated by the hallway sconce as Ethel chimed in that unlocking it might finally clarify how this arrangement could benefit everyone involved long-term, Lisa nodding hesitantly with the kids peeking from the living room archway, my hand hovering on the cool brass knob as my heart pounded with the precipice of revelations that could either mend or demolish the fragile ties holding us together in this overcrowded haven. With my family's expectant faces pressing close in the dimly lit hallway where the air hung heavy with the scent of cooling pizza boxes from dinner and the faint mustiness of the house settling under the weight of a week's accumulated tensions, my fingers finally closed around the brass knob of the study door that had loomed as an unspoken mystery since their chaotic arrival, turning it slowly with a click that echoed like a verdict in the charged silence broken only by Sarah's soft whimper. From the living room archway where she clutched Tommy's hand, David's jaw set in determination mingled with a flicker of apprehension that betrayed his deeper fears about what lay beyond. Lisa's eyes pleading for resolution amid her own swirling doubts about the debts and deceptions that had uprooted their lives. And Ethel's sharp gaze narrowing as if she anticipated leverage from whatever secrets this room guarded after her own history with similar hidden compartments in her past. As the door creaked open on hinges I'd oiled myself last spring to preserve the quiet solitude of the space, a rush of cooler air carried the aroma of aged paper and polished wood from within, revealing the modest study unchanged since my husband's final days with its heavy oak desk positioned under the slanted ceiling beam. Shelves lined with leather-bound ledgers from his accounting firm and stacks of correspondence tied with faded ribbons that chronicled not just our financial triumphs, but the intricate web of family obligations we'd navigated through economic ups and downs in this very neighborhood, where neighbors still remembered the block parties and shared potlucks that built community bonds stronger than blood alone. They surged forward almost as one, David leading with purposeful strides to the desk drawers he yanked open under the glow of the desk lamp I flicked on with a steady hand despite my racing pulse, Lisa hovering near the shelves with the kids peeking around her legs wide-eyed at the unfamiliar treasures like the brass globe my husband had spun during story times for David as a boy. While Ethel maneuvered to the filing cabinet in the corner, her fingers itching toward folders labeled with dates from the 1970s onward that might hold echoes of her own entanglements. But what emerged first were the crisp property deeds yellowed slightly at the edges, proving the house had been paid off outright 15 years ago with no liens or shared titles that could justify their presumptive claims to permanence, documents I'd safeguarded as symbols of my hard-won independence after nursing night shifts funded every mortgage payment without a dime from extended family handouts. The realization dawned gradually across their features, David's shoulders slumping as he traced the signatures confirming sole ownership in my name. Lisa's hand covering her mouth in a mix of relief and regret over the illusions they'd built about this as a safety net for their troubles. The children oblivious as Tommy reached for a dusty model airplane on the shelf, prompting me to intervene gently with a smile that masked my inner turmoil. And Ethel's face paling to a ghostly white as she rifled through adjacent envelopes, uncovering letters from her late sister detailing how our family had quietly covered medical debts during her illness without fanfare or repayment expectations. A revelation that mirrored their current pleas for shelter and twisted the knife of irony by exposing how roles had reversed without the grace we'd once extended freely. In that suspended moment, as dust motes danced in the lamplight filtering through the half-drawn blinds overlooking the darkened backyard, where fireflies had long since faded with the season, I delivered my culminating revenge with a measured calm born from days of simmering resentments and whispered consultations, explaining how on that very first afternoon after David's unilateral decree I'd driven to the local attorney's office in Town Square amid the bustle of afternoon shoppers and secured a protective order safeguarding the property from any coerced encroachments, a legal shield that now rendered their occupation tenuous at best and empowered me to offer a pragmatic choice rather than outright eviction. Pack their belongings by morning and accept my one-time assistance with a few months' rent deposit for a fresh start in a rental closer to the city, or persist in the standoff and face the formal channels that would dismantle their illusions of entitlement while I stood firm in the home I'd earned through sweat and solitude. Humor threaded through the gravity as David stammered about family loyalty above all else, and I quipped back that true loyalty respected the foundations others laid rather than bulldozing them for convenience, like turning a widow's nest into an impromptu bailout hostel. The wit landing with satisfying precision that elicited a reluctant chuckle from Lisa even as tears welled in her eyes, Ethel sputtering indignant denials about past favors being loans in disguise that rang increasingly hollow against the evidence scattered across the desk, and the kids piping up with innocent confusion about why everyone looked so serious now, diffusing the edge just enough to humanize the confrontation without softening its impact. Ultimately, as the clock on the wall ticked toward midnight marking the end of this fraught chapter, they opted for departure with hugs that felt tentative and promises of weekly calls exchanged over mugs of chamomile tea in the kitchen afterward to ease the parting. David loading the truck at dawn with boxes strapped down under the graying sky, promising rain that matched the bittersweet mood. Lisa whispering thanks for the tough nudge toward accountability while corralling the sleepy children into their seats, and Ethel casting one last appraising glance at the study door, now firmly shut behind us, as if committing its contents to memory for future reckonings. Alone once more as the engine faded down the driveway, crunching over fallen leaves, I locked the front door and wandered back to the study to replace the documents with hands steadier than before. The house enveloping me in its familiar quietude that now carried echoes of what-ifs about whether this clever reclamation of boundaries had fortified my peace or erected walls too high for reconciliation. Pondering if the unanswered debts might draw them back in desperation, or if the real ambiguity lay in the family we'd all idealized versus the flawed one staring back from those old letters, leaving me with a victory laced in uncertainty about forgiveness's true cost in the years stretching ahead through Ohio's changing seasons.